Okay, before I get started on today's instructions, I just want to point out one new little procedure. So when you're on the homepage of my Canvas, you know that there's this daily schedule, and one new feature that you'll start seeing is this vocabulary section. So we're going to start learning some good tips and tricks, and you'll start seeing that I'm going to keep track of all the tips and tricks you learn right there. So today's assignment is practicing the plot line, but we're going to make it fun and kind of weird and do it with emojis. So, a lot of you might be saying, Mrs. Coates, I already know the plot line because Mr. C or Mrs. Corianos already taught it to us. I am a pro. And that's awesome. And so I know that you're probably thinking that, so I'm going to show you this to answer the question of why are we doing this if I've already done it in another class. This is called the forgetting curve.
What is the forgetting curve? Roll back to 1885 and Herman Ebbinghaus was in the prime of his life. His beard had blossomed into a fantastic set of bristles and he was busy pioneering an experimental study of memory. His rigorous research method needed only one subject, himself. Herman got to work testing his memory and plotting the results. His findings showed just how rapidly information seeps out of our brains. Within a month, Herman had forgotten 90% of everything he had originally learned. His findings have since been backed up by neuroscientists. Our brains operate a strict use it or lose it policy.
Okay, so I want to go back to this graph so you can see kind of how astounding that is. That this neuroscientist proved that when we learn something, so here's days, the first day we learn something, yeah, we can remember it, no problem. But look how much you forget by day 2, and then by day 3, and so on and so forth. So that's why sometimes in school, you'll do something that you might have done in another way in a different class, but it's because, for the most part, we forget a lot of what we learn, and so when we relearn it, this graph would go back up. So that's the answer of why are we doing this. So, that being said, before I explain the assignment, let's just review and make sure we remember. So, more than anything, remember that plot is just a fancy word for story. If you have a plot, you have a story. If you have a story, you have a plot. If you have a plot, you have a story. If you have a story, you have a plot. Hopefully that's stuck in your brain now. So when we're thinking of the plot line, we just mean all the events in a story, all together. Usually there's 6 parts of a story. Sometimes people change these, so it's something a little different. But for the most part, you see this in general. So you've got how the story starts, exposition, the who and the where and the what. Then, rising action is really important, and you'll hear me say this probably 15 times while you're in my class, but you don't have a story if you don't have a conflict. So rising action is where that conflict is starting to get developed. And then the climax is the craziest, most intense, most exciting part of the story. Often it's called the turning point. I also like thinking of the climax as the point of no return. Like, how can your story get back here when it's this crazy? Falling action is we're starting to fix some of the problems, but we're not ready to end the story yet. And resolution is that things are fixed, and the story can end. And sometimes not everything gets fixed, or sometimes you'll end on a cliffhanger and not everything's actually fixed, and that's okay too. If you ever want to really impress a future English teacher, a fancy synonym for resolution, it's French, but it's a French word that we've kind of adopted into English. It's called denouement. And I'm going to say that again and kind of say it in your head with me because it's a fun synonym in my opinion. So denouement, or resolution. So you should think of yourself as a mad scientist. Just because a plot usually looks like this doesn't mean you couldn't do your own cool thing with it. One time I read a story where you had the exposition, rising action, climax, but then you had a second climax. And there's nothing that says you can't do that. Some cultures will also have a cool spin and their own tradition with how they use the plot line in a different way. So, for example, in some Hispanic cultures, not all, but in some, they have what's called a telenovela, and that's what's called an episodic plot line. So you hear the word episodic and it sounds like episode. So that's just like a TV episode. So one TV episode has exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. And that is an episode altogether. And when you think of a whole TV series, you've got little episodes, and you can take one out and it can stand on its own, but you can put it back with all the seasons all together, and it tells one big overarching story. So episodic plotline. Another culture that does a cool twist on the plot line in some African cultures, not all, but some. They'll have exposition, rising action, climax, and then it stops right there, which is when you get a cliffhanger, which is kind of genius because it's a great way to keep your reader hooked. So always remember that you are allowed to totally experiment and do something weird and different. One time I read a story back when I taught English, and it was called The Watsons Go to Birmingham, and it had normal exposition, rising action, but the rising action lasted forever. And then they had a little bitty falling action and resolution, and that's great. The creative writer was just doing something new and out of the ordinary. So some cool fancy synonyms that next time Mr. C says, hey guys, let's talk about the plot, I want someone to raise their hand and be like, excuse me, Mr. C, do you mean Freytag's pyramid? And then Mr. C's brain will explode because he's so impressed with you. But that's the guy who came up with the idea of plot first. So Freytag's pyramid, right? Because it makes a little pyramid. Another fancy synonym is narrative arc or just plot line. So narrative arc, Freytag's pyramid. And again, the synonym for resolution is denouement. Okay, so some people love creative writing because they can be so experimental, but this first sentence is important because some people have a harder time in creative writing because they're like, how do I get the right answer? Some people, like my brother and my husband, really love math. I know how to get the right answer. This plus this equals this. So in creative writing, we actually have equations. The equation is the plot line. And when you get stuck, because you're gonna get stuck, and that's normal. You're not doing anything wrong when you get writer's block. But when you get writer's block, then think of this equation. If I'm right here, I know that this comes next, so just think of that to help get you unstuck. And remember, more important than almost anything else I'm going to teach you in my class, a good plot has a good conflict. You need a big problem to drive the story forward. And if you don't have a big enough problem, that's when your story's probably getting stuck. So let's put all this into play. And just to make sure you're extra ready for this assignment, here is the plot with a dragon chicken. Yes, I said dragon chicken. Get excited.
If you're going to Plot Mountain, you gotta start somewhere. We'll call this the introduction. And guess what happens there? You just grab the...
Remember, introduction can also, is usually called exposition. So think of exposition, introduction, mean the exact same thing.
Characters and settings, that's who, what, when, and where. The characters are the people that are there. What do they look like? Why should we care? The setting is the place where to be. What exactly do characters see on their way to Plot Mountain?
Okay, so we have some characters, we know when, we know where, we know what. Exposition. Next comes rising action.
At the start of Plot Mountain, you're gonna have to go up. We call this the rising action. And here starts the plot. There's a conflict in the story. You should describe exactly what. Like a character has problems to work through with themselves or the world. What should they do? Or maybe there's a big argument or some dramatic natural event some way up Plot Mountain.
Woohoo, we have a problem! The dog got kidnapped by the evil dragon, so we need a conflict, we need a problem to make a story keep going.
Keep going up Plot Mountain until you reach the top. We call this the climax, and here you can...
Or sometimes, remember, called the turning point, or the point of no return. This is going to be the craziest part of your story.
Stop, you must face the biggest problem that leads to a turning point. Here's the story, the most intense, with emotions, drama, and suspense. But actions like this cannot stay. The story must change and go a different way at the top of Plot Mountain.
Okay, there was our dragon chicken. Now comes falling action.
After the top of Plot Mountain, you're gonna start to go down. We call this the falling action, and it lasts until flat ground. There's still action in the story, but it will start to slow down. So the worst is over, yeah, the worst is through, but now it will. The characters do, there are still some problems. How long will they last? And don't forget the endings coming fast on the way down Plot Mountain.
Resolution or denouement.
After climbing down Plot Mountain, one's gotta end somewhere. We call this the resolution, and what will happen there? You should answer all the questions until you are aware that conflicts in the story from before aren't there anymore. Unless there's gonna be a sequel or part 2, and then you'll have to think, what will the characters do the next time on Plot Mountain?
Yay! Return of the Dragon Chicken. Okay, so now you should be feeling really comfortable with plot. So now it's time to talk about the specific assignment. It's really easy to get an A on this, and hopefully you have a lot of fun. So, let me skip ahead. This looks like a lot, but honestly, it's really easy. So I'm just going to show you step by step what all these mean. This is an example of what yours might end up looking like. So we've got a scary story told by emojis. And then I call this part the idiot proofing. Now, don't let this scare you. This person wrote way more than she had to. But this is the part where you're just going to make sure that I don't mess up while I'm grading. You're going to idiot proof it for me and make sure that I understand what's happening with your emojis. But when you do yours, you're going to do it with as little writing as humanly possible. Okay, but this is what we're doing. We're writing a story, but we're writing it with emojis. This is a cheat sheet in case you forget any of the things that I just went over. If you need help remembering what one part of the plot line is. And this is your assignment. So you're going to notice, look right here, it says funny story, shocking story, sad story, scary story. You don't have to do all of those. You get to pick whichever two you want. If you want to do a funny and a scary, great. If you want to do a sad and a scary, whatever you like most. And if you want to change these, if you wanted to do like adventurous instead, you are welcome to change this, okay? So, when you're ready to start putting your emojis, look over here. You can see I have a bunch ready to go for you. And you can honestly just make it up as you go along. So when you think of exposition, I need a main character. Like maybe I want this unicorn to be my main character. So I click the unicorn, and then Control-C is copy. Go back up to your story, click, and then Control-V pastes, and then I can move it wherever I'm ready for that emoji to help me tell that part of my story. So now I have a character. Ignore this little line. It used to say conflict here, but that's what I need next. If I have a character, now I need a problem. And again, you can make it up as you go along. So I've got a unicorn. Maybe my unicorn is super, I don't know. Ooh, he's angry. He's angry. So here's an angry emoji. So Control-C copy, Control-V paste. And what is he angry at? I don't know. Oh, he's angry at his grandma and grandpa. Okay, there we go. So, I'll stop there. So hopefully you can see just how easy that is. When you're telling your emoji story, you should have about 10 emojis. If you do more than 10, you would get extra coins. If you do a lot less than 10, I'll take away a point or two, but I won't be too evil. And once you have about 10, then remember you're going to idiot proof it, but do as little writing as humanly possible. And kind of think of it as translating your story. You're translating the emojis just a little bit into something written. So again, there's 4 empty plots. You only need to do 2. If you do more than 2, then you will get extra coins. So that is highly encouraged. And I also want to point out an extra helpful tip on this last slide of emojis. It says if you can't find one, feel free to Google whatever else you need. Just make sure they stay school appropriate. Another trick that sometimes people will do is often they'll put multiple emojis together. Like if I want it to snow on the ghost, I could put those together and it would count as 2 different emojis out of my 10. That's just fine. You can't just repeat the same emoji. I did have a kid one year who just, like copied and pasted the same emoji 10 times. That would not count. I want to see the story actually happening. If this website works, some years it's been blocked, some years it hasn't. Feel free to get emojis there, but you can also just Google. And I think that's everything. So have fun with practicing the plot line with emojis.